we find that with neurodiversity, it takes time and energy to live in a world that wasn't made for us. And consequently, there's got to be trade-offs. But whether it's Skechers or whether it's AI or whether it's something else that some entrepreneur has been innovative in creating, you don't have to be well-rounded to be successful in life.
Well, welcome back to the NITW Podcast. We are a team of consultants with neurodiversity in the workplace on a mission to deliver value to neurodivergent professionals and the organizations who employ them. I'm joined today by the Krista Deguffroy from the NITW team. Krista, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Charles. Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Deguffroy, Senior Consultant with NITW. And our guest today, I will let her introduce herself.
I'm Joy Young, and I'm a neurodiversity advocate.
Great to have you here, Joy. Thanks for driving down and making the trip. And we've known each other for about 5 years, but this is our first time meeting in person. So nice to meet you. It only took me less than 5 minutes, though, to understand, like, you are on a mission. Like, you are a true believer. This is your life's work, and your love, I think, is how you put it. Can you tell our audience about that mission that you're on in this neurodiversity space?
Absolutely. So I first walked into this space unexpectedly. In 1992, we adopted a 3-year-old little boy who was bright and chatty with not articulate language. We thought it was developmental, but long story short, years later we learned that he was autistic. And our statement was, like the country song said, I was country before country was cool. We were autism before autism was cool. And we were here in Atlanta. Emory University was on the cutting edge of understanding autism and making diagnoses. And because of the wonderful professionals there, we started a journey that then proceeded to the second adoption we had of a daughter that wound up being ADHD. So we learned that it was more than just autism. It was a more complicated journey, this neurodiversity journey. And then, most recently, my husband of 44 years, a psychologist and just an incredible human being, at the age of 67, we learned that he is neurodivergent as well, which in many ways was surprising to us, but makes a lot of sense now in hindsight. So I've been at this for well over 30 years. I've watched it change and grow, and I'm constantly curious because I know tomorrow I'm going to learn something different.
Yeah. Now, I feel like your story resonates with so much of our audience. I mean, of course, as we know, with the case zero of autism emerging in 1943 and this whole notion of neurodiversity emerging like not until the 90s, it's taken decades for folks to hear the message and have some kind of just baseline awareness, especially in the schools, in the workplace, in our family lives, at our dinner tables, and so on, right? And it sounds like you had a very similar inroad to the neurodiversity conversation that so many folks have. Either it's through their kiddos getting recognized, or a spouse, or a colleague, whatever the case may be, that initiates the conversation, and then it's kind of a path to discovery from there. And it sounds like that resonates with your journey as well.
Very much so. You know, the language in this space has changed over the years, and I think it's interesting. 10 years ago, if I said neurodiversity, most people would say, oh, you mean autism, because the two were understood to be the same, one and the same, and we now know that very differently. I love the terms that are currently being used of the neuromajority and the neurominority, although at my house, while I am neurotypical, I am in the neurominority because the neuromajority is neurodistinct. So I think that as we continue to get language to help explain our various situations and we seek to understand one another, which I think is key in this journey, neurodiversity is all of us and we're all different. So how do we navigate life?
Right, and that's something I love about our audience is, you know, Chris is probably the same way. When I tell people I'm a neurodiversity consultant, they're kind of sounding out neurodiversity and like, what is that? And you kind of lay it out to me, and to your point, language has evolved so much in the last 10 or 20 years, and different preferences for different labels and how we speak about the topic, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think something I'm eager to hear your perspective about is your background in education, and it sounds like your time in education kind of predates a lot of that environmental awareness. And yeah, can you just lay that out for our audience, like what that looked like in your role in education?
Yeah, so for those that are in education, I am just about approaching my 50th year if I start counting those first pre-teaching experiences. Public Law 94-142 was just being enacted, and for now many that's a textbook study of history that we look at, but we were just beginning to say every child has a right to come to school and have support. And when I was in elementary school, I had a number of individuals that I knew that didn't come to our school because they didn't meet basic criteria, and they went to alternative locations, some private, some public, that were siloed. And of course now we're in a very different place. So through the years, I've seen many roller coasters of the way that we've handled things. I've seen isolated classrooms, I've seen inclusion, and through it all, I think my heart and the heart of most educators is to seek to understand these differences. Unfortunately, I think traditional settings and for many of our schools, things being done the way they were done when my grandmother taught in a one-room schoolhouse,
Right.
whether our desks are in rows or we change classes every 45 minutes, but these traditional ways of doing things have not been reviewed. And Adam Grant has a wonderful book that I just recently reread called Think Again.
Love Adam Grant.
And in that book, he talks about best practices. And we get a hold of best practices and we hold on to them as if they are everything. And the fact of the matter is, in my nearly 50 years in education, best practices have changed. And we need to continue to revisit our best practices as we have new information.
100%. And I think that generational differences that you're laying out here is such a key piece of this conversation to understand for folks. I mean, I know for myself, being in really that first post-Americans with Disability Act, they now call it the ADA generation.
Yes.
Like, I came up in my entire K-12 journey with folks integrated into mainstream type of environments. And to your point, like, that was really kind of the guinea pig class where there were, of course, going to need to be some iterations in terms of what those best practices are and what that looks like. What were some of those lessons learned from the early years as you saw this become more of an emphasis until today, and what does that roadmap look like?
I think one of the things is the fact that, and honest truly, I've been a teacher, I've been an administrator, I've never experienced anyone in education that didn't care deeply about children.
Right.
And unfortunately, my parents used to say, you will wind up parenting the way we parented, even though you don't want to. I think many of us have taught the way our teachers taught because it worked for us, and therefore it should work for others. And that onus of the fact that when it didn't work, it was the child's fault, I think is something that we're now learning and understanding. When I was in school, just one example, being left-handed was very, very frowned upon. And my best friend was left-handed, and the teacher, and we shared several years of school together, but the teacher at one point tied her hand behind her back. And then later, when she went to pick up a crayon, took a ruler and smacked the top of her hand and drew a welt on the top of her hand, because best practices at the time said that you are damaging a child to allow them to use their left hand. Well, now we know that the damage was done by insisting that they use the right hand. And most countries, not all, but most countries around the world have come to that new awareness and understanding. But I think that onus always being on the individual has caused a lot of hurt, a lot of PTSD. I deal with a lot of adults who have heavy burdens that they carry from their school experiences, delivered by well-meaning educators. And that's the part that breaks my heart, is the intent was not to harm anyone, it was to do good, but that wasn't the result.
That example, it's so interesting to me. in the world of education, we're talking about that example because we often talk in our work about when you know better, you do better. And when we're talking about making neuroinclusive choices, we think of these adjustments and accommodations as workplace tools, right? And having left-handed scissors or having a desk where you have the space if you're a left-handed person. These are the tools that make people successful instead of having to change the system, change the way that they would naturally do something to fit in with others. It's kind of parallel to our conversations around masking and having to fit in with neurotypical individuals. And it's just so striking to me that the conversation around writing with your left hand is a perfect case study to the work that we talk about every day.
Yeah, and I think that left-handed example just tracks with what we're hearing from so many neurodivergent folks when they're talking about their experiences in that K-12 system, right? I've heard so many times from dyslexic folks, for example, the traditional popcorn reading type of scenario is that nightmare, right? And they internalize thousands of those messages about you're just not very good at being a student, something's wrong with you, right? But we've seen so many of those dyslexic folks transition into entrepreneurship and the workforce and thrive when they're not being that square peg in the round hole, right? With half the sharks on Shark Tank being dyslexic and Steve Jobs and so many famous examples, they will tell you, yeah, being in school is a nightmare for me, but now that I've in an environment that's aligned with my strengths and there's an awareness of what some of these differences looks like, it's night and day type of a difference. Have you seen some of that night and day type of examples from some of your work?
Absolutely. I think you use the term entrepreneur because we're talking about people that are given or have chosen the pathway of independence and freedom, individuals that have gone into traditional work settings, and consequently they have attempted to put the square peg in the round hole. And I love the quote, and I'm not going to tell you who said it right now, but it basically says the problem with attempting to put a square peg in a round hole is not that it's hard work, it's that you damage the peg. And I think that sits really hard with me, is that was not the intent, but that is what happens as we continue. And in many of our organizations, unfortunately, we have tradition. This is the way we've always done it. Well, this is our culture where you just need to fit in. And again, maybe there needs to be some give and take on both sides, and it's not the individual's full responsibility. Culture needs to make the adjustments. Our communities need to say, yes, we've always done it that way, but why?
Right.
To constantly be curious, and then also to ask the individual, what would create an environment that would support your gifts and your talents? What would be a more conducive situation for you?
Culture and workplaces and communities, they're not stagnant.
Yes.
As each person adapts and each person enters those new communities, enters those new workplaces, things change. And asking, to your point, asking that square peg to fit in a round hole, it does damage the person. That's never the intention, but we don't want to damage our community members for the sake of preserving the notion of community. That's a very powerful statement. I'm going to sit with that for a while.
And Joy, something that stands out to me about your perspective, and I think makes it fairly unique, is you have the half a century experience professionally in the education space, but also have this perspective of a parent, like you had said, having family members who you've seen matriculate through these systems. What have their journeys looked like in the educational systems they've navigated?
So partly is the parenting piece, and then I will jump on into the fact that I was, through unplanned circumstances, exposed to the business culture, and didn't ask for that, but I was very fortunate to have 3+ years at Ernst & Young as a neurodiversity coach and understand how different that environment was than my safe little schoolhouse. And school was warm and friendly. I'll be perfectly honest with you, for our son in particular, public school wasn't ready for him. And my journey was such that I was a public school administrator who wound up homeschooling my son simultaneously. So we took him out of the school system, again, because I could not ask the school to change the length of class periods. So to use one of Sean's examples, Sean, when he gets in the zone, he will go deep and he will go thoughtful, and he will be there for a long time.
Sure.
But when you're in a classroom in a middle school or a high school where the bell's ringing every 45 to 50 minutes, you're not allowed that luxury. And so not only did he not bring his brilliance to the table, but he was extremely frustrated with that. And so through different circumstances, we wound up homeschooling him, which was for us the right thing to do, not something we planned by any means. But I do see individuals with families with neurodivergent children, whether it's dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, looking for alternative ways, which again, I'm a public school, private school, homeschool advocate. And I, at the end of the day, always want to know what's best for the child. And I think that element of choice is an important thing to consider. Any of those school settings can only give so much. Were any of them ideal? No. And were there trade-offs? Absolutely. And at different seasons for our son, different school settings were best. But in the end, I think what we learned was leaning into his strengths, and I know you all are all about that, is finding what does he do well, and does he need to be well-rounded? And I've told many parents this, I'm not about being well-rounded. I'm about having strength, because I contend that success breeds success. And then I'm about workarounds. The new Skechers shoes that you slide your foot into, what a godsend. Okay, I have a 37-year-old son who still can't really tie his shoes. He can,
Sure.
but we'll need to wait a very long time on him. But why should he? He has he has an undergrad and master's degree in computer science and is a brilliant Java coder. He doesn't need to tie his shoes. So we find that with neurodiversity, it takes time and energy to live in a world that wasn't made for us. And consequently, there's got to be trade-offs. But whether it's Skechers or whether it's AI or whether it's something else that some entrepreneur has been innovative in creating, you don't have to be well-rounded to be successful in life.
100%. I think that tracks with so many neurodivergent students and professionals. Some of those rote, mundane tasks that people may misperceive them as excelling at can be incredibly draining for some of those folks, right? And take away that bandwidth that they need for success in their family life, school life, professional life. And just also calling back to the piece about different seasons, he needed different things in education and no one size fits all. If you're a student or potentially parent in our audience right now and you're navigating those different seasons or trying to figure out what is that, Goldilocks ideal environment for, my kiddo or myself as a student, what advice would you give them to be able to discern some of those pieces and navigate those different seasons?
I will start with the fact that I have done many things incorrectly, and my husband and I too, as parents. We have learned through the School of Hard Knocks.
Yeah.
However, one of the things that we did do right out of frustration when my son was in a small private school, we were thinking that was the fix, and it wasn't, and he was extremely depressed, and we were really at our wits' end. I sat down with him, and I said, Sean, just tell me, what does the ideal learning environment look like for you? And he was quiet, and he took a long time, and he got a pencil and paper, and he started just making some notes and jotting down some thoughts. And he's not artistic, but he had kind of a spreadsheet, and it was a place where I can work on one thing at a time, a place where I don't get interrupted. It's a place where I can have access to questions so that I can answer them and move on to the next task. It's a place where, yes, I know I'm going to have to do history, but I don't have to do a whole lot of it. And in the end, he told us what his learning environment should look like for him. And so when it came to foreign language, we did this much. When it came to math science, we opened our arms wide open. We went and apprenticed with electricians. We went and hung out with chemistry teachers in the evenings in their home labs. We did practical hands-on things, but he drove that conversation. Now, he's 11 years old at this point. So some of it made sense, and then we would come back to, I know, Sean, but you still have to learn how to write sentences and craft an essay. He's not a creative writer. But then I began to do a little research and find out, you know what? technical writing is probably what's going to be important in his life. He needs to know how to craft paragraphs to communicate effectively. But using technical terms and sentences that aren't flowery, that's where we need to focus on his efforts. So again, we're back to the strengths. Strengthening his strengths is what got us to where we needed to be. And we were light on things like foreign language, which were extremely difficult and painful for him.
Right, and it kind of piggybacking on that, like, what are my strengths, what are the support needs, what are the ideal success factors and conditions for me? We had breakfast this morning, and you showed me the one-pager that y'all had developed that he brings to work and can hand to a teammate or a manager and say, these are my communication preferences and work style and sensory preferences and so on, right? What do you think that could look like for folks in our audience, like whether they're a K-12 student looking to share this information with teachers, or maybe a college student looking to share it with group mates, or a professional wanting to share it with their team? What do you think that could look like in terms of a user manual of me, or work with me passport? I've heard some people call it. What is your advice for putting something like that together in use?
So for Sean, that actually came to us when I was working at Ernst & Young, and I had been introduced to the Autism at Work movement, and there was an organization out in San Francisco where they did this manual of me for every team member. Now, I am all over this concept because, again, neurodiversity is all of us.
Sure.
So just because I'm autistic and you're not doesn't mean that I need a manual of me and you don't. And so what they did is they had everybody in the organization, from the CEO down, create this user manual. And it was done basically in a Word doc. There are those that have been creative and put graphics on it or made them into spreadsheets or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's about, how do I work best? How do I communicate? What strengths do I bring to the team? What struggles will I have? And what are some necessities? Like for Sean, one of those things is clear instruction. I need to know exactly what my target is, and I need to know the time frame. You can't say to me, get this to me as soon as possible. The term as soon as possible,
that's a big one.
For a student or for an employee that is neurodivergent is all just, what does that mean? And they can spend much time spending effort trying to figure out what it means. But all of those are good communication skills.
Right.
So taking that manual, when we finally got that manual created for Sean, and it's been very effective in a number of settings and in job searches as well, all of a sudden I realized we did this back when he was 5 years old in kindergarten, and he was student of the week. Do you remember when your kids did that? And we had to do a poster board, and we had to put pictures of the family, and we had to talk about who he was and what he liked to do. And it really is, talking about schools, it could be tweaked just a little bit to not just be about me, but honing into those, how do I learn best?
Right.
What are the situations? Do I work best in a team? What are the sensory environments that I work best in? Do I work best when there's music playing? Do I work best when I get to go sit in the corner desk and pull the hoodie over my head and shut out all the visual distractions so that I can get my math page done? There's so many sensory aspects that we can incorporate. So you can take that from kindergarten and just carry it on through. I love it when leadership plays too. And that we all, again, come back to this fact that neurodiversity is not about special ed. And in the workplace, and I've coached a number of individuals, I've had folks say, I'm not interested in being a part of the accommodations process. I don't want to go to HR. I was in special ed. I was a loser. I was pulled out of my classes for 12 years. I don't want to do that anymore. And I have to appreciate that.
What I thought was so amazing about the visual you showed us this morning is nowhere on there did it disclose diagnosis. There was no label. There was no sentence that said, I'm autistic. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That's up to the individual. But the whole purpose of it was to focus on, here's how I work, here's how I learn, here's what I need. So in an earlier conversation we've had as a team was around learn the lesson, lose the label. And it's just a really great visualization of how you can still take those concepts and learn what a person needs, what they need to be the most successful, and what you can do to support that without having to have the name or the diagnosis that may or may not bias you into what you think that diagnosis might be, right? Like I'm a parent of a child with autism and ADHD, and when I hear those labels, I'm like, okay, I have a visual of what I think those are, but that's not true for everybody. I'd much rather know what's going to be someone's support needs, how they learn, how they work, and how they communicate best.
And I love that statement. I will give credit to Dave Thompson,
Yeah.
who is a dear friend. He also says, getting what you need to be successful should be normal, not formal. And wow, that resonates with me, is that as a manager, I need to be aware and I need to be in communication with you as a team member. What do you need? It shouldn't have to always go through HR and a list of accommodations and this formal process, because again, we are separating, we are isolating, we are making this far more difficult than it needs to be. And oftentimes, and I hear this, well, it's not fair. And as a school principal, I heard that from many teachers. Well, I can't do that for Charles because it's not fair. And I think this whole thing is, then let's do it for everybody.
Right.
I will tell you one of the big ones that I have seen a few organizations do, and I wish so many more would do, is in the interview process, they set the questions for the interview prior to the interview, not when they were asked for, but to everybody. You're going to come into my organization. I own Dog and Suds drive-through, and here are the things that I need to know about you and how you work, and I'm going to ask you these before you come for the interview.
I want to work at Dog and
I love that concept in that every one of us ought to have a chance to prepare. So is the interview a gotcha interview?
Right.
Is that here's my question, and how fast can you think of the answer? Because I will tell you, many individuals that are neurodivergent, whether it's the anxiety or whether it's something that we call episodic memory, where they literally cannot, not that they don't want to, they literally cannot recall experiences. When you say as an interview, tell me about a time that you had a problem with a colleague and how did you respond to that? And when the individual goes blank and has nothing to offer, check, check. We don't want this person here. They can't answer that question. No, that's not it at all. What are you driving at? How they work, what they need for support. I just love those organizations that have chosen to remove that barrier and that stress and that anxiety and say, bring your best self. Here are the things we want to know about you. Come prepared.
Right. And I think that really tracks with this workforce trend of teams working in different time zones, and rather than punching clocks, they're doing project-based work. And if you can simulate those projects in the interview in the way that they're going to be delivered in a day-to-day fashion, that's going to not only make that interview process more inclusive, like you're saying, but also more predictive of what the skills they're bringing to the table and what that's going to look like for them. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, I really love that point.
And work's not a pop quiz. No one at work is getting a pop quiz every day. So you're expected to do research, to look at a problem, to formulate an idea, and then come and share.
Yes.
None of us are going to our desks or logging on every day and getting gotcha questions from our leaders. That's just not a conducive way of working. So why would we interview that way?
Yes. But it's because that was best practices, and we haven't updated, we haven't rethought how we interview, and I think that's an important piece. On that interview process note, I will also say, reviewing that job description, and I know you all are about this too, is what are you hiring for? What kind of skills, what are the strengths that you need for that individual? Be as clear and articulate and concise as you can. I can't tell you the number of neurodivergent individuals that I have supported. We've gone to look at jobs and they just self-select out.
Right.
I am not an effective communicator. What does that mean? That's not me. Let's go to the next one. And we're losing incredible people that we need in the workforce because of our archaic practices.
Right.